Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Pilot Principle. This is the podcast where we take a look at just the first episode of a series, the pilot, and then use it to decide if we should watch the entire series, or at least the second episode, because there is just so little time and so much to bloody watch these days, eh? On today's episode, we are taking a look at Netflix's The Gentleman. When analysing a pilot, I typically take a look at the story, of course, as well as the characters, which are the protagonists and the antagonists. I also take a look at the pace to see if that works, the serial arc, and do a bit of wild speculation as to where I think the series might be going. I then look at the end of episode hook to see if that has convinced us to at least press play on episode 2, all before letting you know if I think the pilot episode has done its job. With all of that out of the way, let us get rolling with the pilot synopsis as provided by Netflix UK. I have no idea if it's different in the US, that's why I specify that this is the UK version. Okay, when the Duke of Holstead dies, his second son inherits everything, including the title, house, and ground, plus a whole heap of trouble. I think as a pilot synopsis goes, it's relatively solid. I'm already wondering why the second son and what kind of trouble they are going to be inheriting. But before we can start answering any of those questions, let's get into the credits. I always start with the credits because personally, I think the people working behind the scenes are the unsung heroes. Yes, that is possibly because I also work behind the scenes in television and I also write, so really there's no surprise there. But I'm quite excited for these credits, so let's just get into it. Starting with the pilot title, which is Refined Aggression. I really like that. I feel like I'm refined aggression. I know I probably just come across as refined, but refined aggression? That's a little bit of me. I think it's a good title. It's a memorable title. And it's also a bit of a questioning title. And the idea or the explanation of refined aggression does in fact come up in the episode to give us a bit of context to what that means, which I appreciate. The episode length is 1 hour and 7 minutes. And if you've been listening to me for a long time, you know that if it reaches anywhere beyond the 60-minute mark, I'm mad. Because I don't think that episodes of television should go beyond that point. There is a bit of leeway given to pilot episodes because I understand you're trying to build and create a whole new world and convince people to stick with it. But personally speaking, from watching the pilot episode, I know that 1 hour and 7 minutes was too long and they could have had it be shorter. And finally, we have a series length of 8 episodes, which is a good even number. I just don't trust odd numbered episode lengths. The pilot episode, Refined Aggression, was written and directed by Guy Ritchie, who is also credited as the series creator. And you should know that I am a massive Guy Ritchie fan. I really enjoy a lot of his movies. I think he's got a unique directorial style as well as writing style. And do you know what? He's also just got a little bit of audacity because as much as I like Guy Ritchie as a director and writer, a lot of his films flop. Okay, if not flop, they end up becoming cult classics or what have you. And yet, despite that, he keeps being given chances to keep writing and directing. Again, not mad at it, like his stuff, but I've also got questions. But those questions are for somebody else on another day. So here are some of the films that Guy Ritchie has written and directed. So that includes Snatch, Rock and Roller, Sherlock Holmes, King Arthur Legend of the Sword, Aladdin, The Gentleman, and Wrath of Man. So a few things to note. He didn't write the screenplay for the 2009 Sherlock Holmes film. King Arthur Legend of the Sword, I will die on the hill of saying that it is a fantastic movie. It's a really interesting perspective of the King Arthur story. I've seen it like 4 times. I would recommend that you go and see King Arthur Legend of the Sword. And if you don't like it, I don't want to hear about it. I only want to hear good things about this movie because it's great. And also to note about Ritchie is that he is also going to be directing Aladdin 2. Now, I liked Aladdin. I liked his rendition of Aladdin. So I'm here to see what he's going to do with the sequel. The pilot episode, Refined Aggression, was not written by Ritchie on his own. It was also co-written by Matthew Reed, who, writing credit-wise, is kind of lacking. The only notable credit is that he wrote 5 episodes of Curfew, which was a Sky Max series when Sky Max was going by a different name completely. It was one of their first originals, and I really enjoyed that series. It's completely out of the box. So yes, 5 episodes of Curfew was written by Matthew Reed. But to his credit, even though he doesn't have a lot of writing credit, he does have a lot to say for himself as a producer/executive producer. He has worked on Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and then there were None, Happy Valley, Peaky Blinders, Taboo, Dr. Foster, Curfew of course, and Bodies. Okay, moving on to cast, we first have Theo James, who plays Eddie Horniman, and James has starred in the Divergent film series, Underworld Awakening and Blood Wars, Sanditon, Series 1, The Time Traveller's Wife, the series, and recently he starred in The White Lotus. He also had a voice role on The Witcher and Castlevania. Next, we have Kaya Scodelario, who plays Susie Glass, and if you are British and of a certain age, then you know her from Skins, where she played Effie White. Otherwise, Scodelario has starred in the Maze Runner film franchise, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, and recently This Is Christmas. Next up, we have Daniel Ings, who plays Freddie Horniman, and Ings has starred in Agatha Raisin, W1A, The Crown, Lovesick, Instinct, I Hate Susie, Sex Education, The Winter King, and he had a role on the Marvel movie The Marvels. And finally, on the selected cast list, we have Vinnie Jones, who plays Jeff Seacombe, and Jones has worked with Ritchie before, getting his acting debut in Ritchie's Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, and then going on to star in Ritchie's Snatch. As well as that, he's had roles on Gallivant, Arrow, X-Men The Last Stand, Deception, and Law & Order Organised Crime. A couple of other names to note who star in the pilot episode as well. We have Jolie Richardson, Joshua Maguire, and Giancarlo Esposito. And of course, The Gentleman is available on Netflix. Now, for those who don't know, the series The Gentleman is in fact a sequel to the 2019 movie of the same name, and it is set in the same world, but so far has different characters. And later on in the episode, I will go on to specify where the differences and continuations lie within the original movie and this series. In terms of what made me want to watch the series, girl, I've already said I love a Guy Ritchie movie, so of course I was going to go and watch the series adaptation of The Gentleman, which is of course a movie of his that I thoroughly enjoy. I'm also personally fascinated to see how they're going to adapt it from film to TV. I know technically it is a continuation from the film and not an adaptation, but still I'm interested in seeing what things they'll keep the same and what things will change within the world. Now we've got all of that out of the way, it's time to dive into the pilot itself, starting with the first 10 minutes. Why the first 10 minutes, you ask? Well, because this is the length of time a writer has to grip first the reader and then the watcher into investing in the full pilot episode. So that is why I always look at the first 10 minutes of a pilot. So the first 10 minutes of Refined Aggression goes like this. We are with Eddie Horniman, a high-ranking officer in the army who is in Turkey on the Syrian border. A fancy car pulls up and it's the family lawyer, I think he's the lawyer, who informs Eddie that his father is dying and he needs to come home immediately. Eddie gets in the car and we have a delicious match cut as the car has left Turkey and is now rolling through the English countryside. The car pulls up to an estate and the series title, The Gentleman, hovers in front of the house like a live, looming, bright yellow thing, and the episode title, Refined Aggression, soon follows suit. Eddie is welcomed home by his older brother Freddie and his sister Charlotte before going to see his father, who is literally in his deathbed. Daddy Horniman tells Eddie two things. First, that he abandoned the family when he joined the army. So, great to know that parents will literally keep guilting you until the day that they die. And the second thing that Daddy Horniman says is, look after your brother. He won't survive without you. And then, of course, Daddy Horniman dies. We are at his funeral, which is a small and intimate thing, and standing on the outskirts or watching the proceedings is a woman who is noticed by Eddie. This woman is Susie Glass. Post-funeral, the family are gathered and the lawyer arrives to commence the will reading. Jeff, the groundskeeper, gets a lifetime tenancy to his cottage. Sabrina, the widow, gets an annual allowance and the dog. Charlotte gets a boat and £1,000 a week until she marries a man. And finally, the title, the estates, the overseas houses, the lands, the pebbles, and the problems all go to Edward Horniman, which takes everyone, including the firstborn son, Freddie, by surprise. And that is bang on 10 minutes. Gosh, it's all about second sons recently. The gentlemen, Mary and George, blimey. In terms of an intro, I think that it ended on a really good turning point. We've seen what life was like before, and we see that everything has changed. It took everything in me not to say when the Fire Nation attacked. We see that everything has now changed for everybody. We get a sense of the family's status, and we are given a little teaser into who this mysterious woman is, who we later learn is Susie Glass. And as an intro, I think it's fine. It did its job. It could have been a little bit snappier, but as openings go, it wasn't too bad. Moving on to the main characters, we first have Edward, aka Eddie Horniman, who we kind of get the idea is supposed to be the spare / the protector, and he's not cut from the same privileged cloth as the rest of his family. He went off to the army, he worked, he had a job, whereas his brother presumably did not. And I wonder where this whole protective status comes from. Is it just because he's taller than his older brother? I wonder if he was shorter, if they would give him the status of protector. But that's a whole other psychological issue. What we don't get too much from Eddie's character is a sense of his personality. Like, who is he? What does he want? Other than to get out of the pickle that he's been put in, what does he want? We don't really find that out in the pilot episode at all. Even though he's been given this great responsibility, we don't get an idea of how he's wearing that. Is he angry about it? Is he happy about it? Is this what he's always wanted? Like, we really just don't know. So that is something that is definitely missing from Eddie's character in the pilot episode, his wants and his needs. But perhaps that's part of his story. Maybe he doesn't expect anything as the second son, and now that he has all this responsibility and power, he finally has the chance to dream big. So perhaps that's where his story arc is going and why we don't get so much of his personality in the pilot episode. Next, we have Susie Glass. First and foremost, great name, great outfits. I've already ordered myself a red beret. Susie Glass is a businesswoman with a capital B. She comes from a crime family. Her dad is currently doing a 10 stretch. And she gives off the energy that she is not to be underestimated. Perhaps that's because she knows who her family is and people wouldn't dare mess with her because of who her dad is. Either way, she has clearly taken to being in charge of the operation. Because one thing to know about Susie and Susie's family is that from the pilot episode, we are led to believe that she is in charge of the cannabis business that is secretly growing underground on the Horniman estate. But not just the Horniman estate, a number of estates up and down the country. So to be in charge of such a large operation, yes, she has to be a businesswoman, she has to be able to keep her cool, and she has to be able to keep her adversaries at bay. What I really like about Susie is that there is something really subtle about her approach, but clear in her intentions. Now, I wouldn't put it past her to know more or want more than what she's letting on in the pilot episode, or to be using Eddie, because when Eddie needs a large chunk of money in order to pay off his brother's debts, he goes to Susie and she is helping him do that. But at what cost? Something tells me when it comes to Susie and the family that she's from, she isn't afraid to come knocking and call on debt to be collected. In terms of Eddie and Susie and their character dynamics, they do run around in the pilot episode like a pair of mismatched detectives, but I'm not getting a romantic tone off of the two of them. Not to say that their relationship cannot be platonic. I'm just putting it out there, because as well as not getting any romantic inklings or sexual inklings, I'm also not getting much. I'm not getting a sense of respect from one to the other, a sense of distaste, a sense of fear, just nothing. So I think it will be interesting to see where these two come to ahead. Perhaps it will just be a partnership between the two of them, but so far from the pilot episode, they are just two people working together because they both have something the other one wants. Eddie needs money to pay off his brother's debts, and Susie doesn't want him to sell his house so that she can keep her weed business underground, literally. Now, in terms of an antagonist, I'm just putting him here because he really pisses me off, and that is Freddie Horniman, first son and entitled posho, because basically he owes a Scouse crime family £8 million and he's left it to his brother to sort out. His younger brother, might I add, and he doesn't help in trying to solve the problem, he just makes it worse and continuously leaves it to Eddie to sort out. Freddie is entitled, he's insecure, he's useless, and he's emotionally fueled and Loki Heike has a drug problem. And you know what? I'm sure, more or less, that he won't try and off his brother to get the title. I mean, it's not exactly the 1600s. And arguably, we feel a little pity for him because, I mean, he spent his whole life thinking that he's going to be king of the castle, only to be cheated from that quote unquote birthright. So sure, we feel bad for him, like a teeny tiny bit, but you know, buck the fudge up, bro. And now it is time for a quick interlude to see what film and TV life is looking like beyond the pilot principle. And girl, I literally just saw you, so there is not much to report. Firstly, in terms of books, I am still in my romance reading month and I have finished reading the 7th Bridgerton book, which is called In His Kiss by Julia Quinn, and it was incredibly predictable and I gave it a 2 out of 5. Next, I finished listening to The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary, and the characters were mostly insufferable, and I gave that a 2 out of 5 as well. I am currently reading Nora Goes Off Script by Annabelle Monaghan, and I am currently listening to Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. In terms of television, I am still watching Harlan Coben's Safe on Netflix, which is just nuts. Absolutely insane. Everything is ridiculous, but it is exactly the kind of easy trash that I need right now, so no complaints from me. There is, of course, the possibilities of Mary and George and The Gentleman to add to the mix, and if you haven't already checked out my pilot review of Sky Atlantic's Mary and George, go ahead and do that to see if I have decided to watch the series or not, and of course keep listening to the podcast to find out if I will be continuing with The Gentleman. In regards to film, I haven't watched anything new since the Mary and George pilot review, but I will say that I do intend to watch Damsel, which is out now on Netflix, and that's the new Millie Bobby Brown movie. And it's a slow cinema week, so I'm going to try and see if I can play catch up by watching either Bob Marley One Love or Wicked Little Letters. Before we head back to your regularly scheduled listening, don't forget to follow at Pilot Principle on Instagram and Twitter/X, where we can chat about the latest in film and TV and books. In terms of what I liked about the pilot episode of The Gentleman, Refined Aggression, it's a bit of a random one, but for me it was the names. So the dad who died, who may or may not have been a lord, his name was Archibald Horatio Land Rover Horniman. And I know I'm saying it quite poshly, Horniman, but horny man. It's the subtlety for me. I had to go back and listen to it twice. I laughed. I think it's the only thing that made me laugh in the entire pilot episode. Also, in regards to names, the siblings, we have, of course, Freddie, Edward and Charlotte, but they had nicknames for each other, which were Fredwood, Edwina and Chuckles. And I'm not one of those eat the rich folk, but it did make them seem like any old group of siblings, which made them a little bit more relatable to the masses, whilst, you know, simultaneously making fun of the random nicknames that upper classes give one another. I know that's a super random thing to really like about the pilot episode, but there you have it. That's what I liked. On the flippity flip side, in terms of what I didn't like, you might want to get settled in. Firstly, I was disappointed that the Guy Ritchiness I was expecting was relatively muted. There were certain aspects that felt quite Guy Ritchie, such as the title coming up and almost being part of the scene. There was a couple of times within the episode where writing literally appeared on screen as a character was describing something in order to make it easy to follow for the audience. And there was one storytelling element that came into it that was very Guy Ritchie, but it was all very sporadic. So part of me wants to say either go full Guy Ritchie or don't. And the second thing that I didn't like too much about the pilot episode was the pace. Certain scenes just lasted too long. So, for example, we get a full 3 minutes of the firstborn son, Freddie, losing his mind over being passed over for air. And it went from funny to boring quite quickly. Then there's a bit where we're watching a boxing match and Eddie goes up to confront someone twice and neither times lead anywhere. It doesn't push the plot forward or reveal something new or give us an insight into what someone is thinking. It was basically a waste of running time. And finally, there's a scene towards the end where we are watching Freddie dance like a chicken. Don't ask. And at first it's funny, and then it's pointed, and it's humiliating. And I understand the point that they were trying to make as it kept going on and on and on. But we had Eddie and Susie just sitting and standing in a corner while all of this was going on, and it went on for a very long time. Yes, it was leading up to something big, and it was trying to emphasize the progress of a character's mental state at that point, but also yawn. Okay, we're almost at that point where I let you know whether or not I will be continuing with the series, but I did promise a very quick comparison between the Gentleman movie and the Gentleman series. So the best way for me to describe it is the series is a continuation of the movie, and it is set in the same world. In the film, we have Michael Pearson, who is played by Matthew McConaughey, and Pearson is the one who starts the whole growing cannabis in the homes of wealthy estate owners. And in The Gentleman, the series, Eddie Horniman, played by Theo James, is a wealthy estate owner whose home is being used to grow cannabis. So that is the connection between the two in a sense. So far, it's to be seen / heard if Michael Pearson's name will come up in the series to fully link it with the movie. Okie dokes, let's remind ourselves of the pilot synopsis. When the Duke of Halstead dies, his second son inherits everything, including the title, house and grounds, plus a whole heap of trouble. I think the writing was okay. I think the setting was fine. I think the pace was choppy. In terms of the serial arc, I don't necessarily know where it's going, but I can speculate that it will revolve around Eddie needing money to manage the family estate and generally cleaning up Freddie's mess and the management of the rest of the family. Susie and her cannabis business, of course, has to come into play, but I can't quite see how from what we've been given about her and the business in the pilot episode. But of course, she'll come into play somehow. In regards to the end of episode hook, let's just say that Freddie has fudged up again and there's now a dead body to be taken care of. The question we're left with is, how is Eddie going to solve said problem, and what kind of problems will this body bring on their heads? And now it's time for the question you've all been waiting for. Will I be continuing with The Gentleman? Pause for dramatic effect. Yes, but I'm sure you guessed that because first and foremost, I'm a biased Guy Ritchie fan, so of course I'm going to give it a shot to see if it is as good as his films. I believe there was a series based on Snatch, the movie, but I haven't seen that, so I'm just going to go based off the Gentleman series to see if Ritchie can do TV as well as he does film. Secondly, I personally am studiously interested in the development from film to TV series, so I want to see and nitpick how they've done that. And finally, and I suppose a little bit more specifically to do with the pilot episode itself, I kind of do want to know how they're going to solve that big body problem that presented itself at the end of the episode. And I'm kind of curious about Eddie's character progression. We get nothing from him in episode 1, literally nothing. So will we get more? Is he an egg to be cracked? Is there untapped potential, untapped craziness in him? I kind of want to find out. But that is, of course, just me. If you are looking for something a little more Cockney focus, something with a little more grit, something that really reminds you of Guy Ritchie's films, then so far this is a posh, glossy pilot. That means the series might not be for you or might not be exactly what you're expecting. And all that is left for me to do is to give the pilot episode a pilot score, and for me it is getting a 3 out of 5. One thing the pilot does really well is setting up the world. We get a decent sense of character from most of the characters we are introduced to, but unfortunately one of those isn't the main character, which is slightly worrying. I will also say that it was poorly paced and didn't have a full sense of what it was in regards to tone. However, overall it was an enjoyable pilot episode and has left me as an audience member wanting to know more. Now that we've hashed out the fundamental principles, will you be giving the pilot episode a watch? Or have you already binged every episode of The Gentleman? As you've gotten 2 new episodes from me this week, I'll be back after a week's break with my pilot review of Netflix's eagerly anticipated and highly budgeted The 3-Body Problem. Don't forget you can follow and chat to me over on Threads, Instagram and Twitter /X @PilotPrinciple. Try not to miss me too much, and I will catch you on the next episode. Aww.